can do production.
So as I repeatedly say, Bill is the most successful of all my PhD students when measured by rank, since he's the only colonel. He has had, well, now he's a fellow of the Special Operations University, the Joint Special Operations University in Tampa. And he also works for the Institute for Military Government Relations.
Yeah, Institute for Military Support to Governments.
Okay. And he's done quite a lot of work in different contexts connected to ontology. So he is the first embedded ontologist in the US military, what will in the future be many. And he's going to talk today about terrorism, warfighting, and so forth from an ontological perspective. Good.
So before I go into the slides, as Barry said, I work in military support to governments. So what that means is that any conflict region, what we call an operating environment, is made up of complex phenomena, and there's nodes and links in the graph of people and places and events and facilities. And a commander, not just a commander, any decision maker, any leader, could be Department of State. It would be interagency, so it would be, again, Department of State, Department of Defense, other countries, they have their militaries there, they have their ambassadors there. So the goal in these places is obviously to stabilize. And so to stabilize, you have to stabilize diplomatically, you have to get the economy stabilized, you have to get rule of law set up, and all the things that we kind of take for granted in our stable countries, that the police work, that the trash is going to get picked up, that you can go to a court and have your grievances heard, and the judge isn't against you just because of your ethnicity or you're not in his tribe or things like that. So things we take for granted, they don't exist in these unstable regions. And so you've probably heard of ill-structured or wicked problems, and that's essentially what we're up against, is trying to make sense out of these wicked problems. And I've always been of the opinion that ontology is a big tool for helping that, a very powerful tool for helping make sense of these unstable regions. So as I go forward in the slides, what I want you to think about is when people are trying to make sense out of an issue, I think ontology is the baseline science, the baseline methodology from which to start. So if you don't get your ontology right, you're going to start saying all sorts of inaccurate things about what we call the operating environment. And if you say inaccurate things, that obvious, I mean, this might be obvious to everyone, but I can't tell you enough how we say inaccurate things about the operating environment, and then we start to act upon it, plan from it, and it leads to disasters. So my theory, or what I want you to take away from this lecture, this discussion, is that an ontological baseline, very disciplined methodology I say BFO is the way to go. It's the best methodology to date. And when I say BFO, I'm saying BFO not as, like, was it 50 classes in BFO and relationships between the classes. I'm saying, yes, that, but also the methodology by which it was put together. And you'll see what I mean by this as I go through my slides. And if there are questions as we go, just interrupt. But again, the takeaway from this lecture is you start with an ontological framework in mind. In my case, BFO, and that's what I keep espousing to anyone who will listen to me. And I think I'm getting traction. I think people are starting to listen. They're saying, look, if we don't have a good framework to start with, we're going to misrepresent, misdescribe, and just not have a good understanding of the operating environment. And I'll talk about all the shenanigans that follows when you don't have a good baseline. So let me get the slides up here. I hope somehow I can still see you all. And you can see my screen?
We can see your face still.
Okay, so I have to do this. It says I'm sharing my screen.
So then press the start button.
Do you see my slides yet?
Nope. We can see what you can see on your screen. So what can you see on your screen?
I see you all. I see me down in the corner, and then I see my computer screen.
Okay, then you need to go back into Skype and press the plus sign again.
Plus, it says I am sharing my screen.
Okay, so that's strange. Let me see if I can press buttons here to make it do something different.
Maybe if I stop sharing and start it again.
Yeah, I think you have to stop sharing.
Let me stop that. Okay, and then I'll start it again. Share screen. Start.
Okay, now we're getting warm.
Okay, so while we're still getting this going, so one of the things that you all are probably interested in is in data science and data management, information management. And so imagine, if you will, you start out and you have a problem that you have to define, describe, and you have to understand the parts of the problem and how they're related to each other. And you start out with conflated and confused notions of the thing you're trying to understand. Well, how in the world would you get from there to knowing what data you'll need, how it describes the environment, because you're already starting from a bad place. So that's what you're going to see if we can get these slides up and running.
So do you have your slides open?
Let me do that here.
Okay, now we're good to go.
You see that?
Yep.
Okay, now unfortunately I can't. Hold on, let me see if I can manipulate these so I can see you all. Oh yeah, okay. So there I can see you all. Just have to make these. So you can see network science for situational awareness? Okay, so this was a lecture I gave in a couple places. I gave this to the Princeton Network Science Center. They have an interdisciplinary effort there at Princeton between sociology, anthropology, demography, epidemiology. All the different departments have this network science effort, interdisciplinary effort going. So I gave it there. I also presented this at the United States Military Academy, also known as West Point. I gave it this at their Network Science Center. And again, that's an interdisciplinary effort. So let me. This is not the way to do, but I'm gonna see if I can keep going this way because I can see you all. If I go full screen, then I can't see you all. So I like to start out with some key terms. And what this is all about is how do we gain situational awareness? So that's a military doctrinal term. And all that really means is how does the commander or the ambassador, if the ambassador is the head person in charge of stabilizing the region, or the combatant commander, how does that person and their staff consists of all their planners, all the intelligence guys, the targeting guys. And when we say targeting, I don't just mean, well, there's a bridge, we're going to target that and take out that bridge or that building or whatever. I mean non-lethal targeting as well. So how do we target a certain population, and we're going to talk to these people, we're going to conduct humanitarian assistance, they need electricity, they need medicine. So by targeting, I mean it's a military term that means you're going to consider something and what the appropriate response is to that. But before you do targeting, you have to have situational awareness. And this is where we run into problems because we're trying to gain situational awareness of the ground, what we call the ground truth. And this is where ontology starts to help almost immediately. Once you gain situational awareness, that drives the joint operation planning process. And you see down there, you see that term targeting. That's what I was saying. We don't mean targeting like you're picking a target to blow it up, although it could mean. It's the process of selecting and prioritizing targets and matching the key terms there are appropriate response. So there's lethal and non-lethal targeting. Okay. So for example, you may have a target audience and you want to influence them. So, and then we have to always worry about the effects of what we're doing, effects with an E. So what's going to happen? Okay, we've engaged this target audience, we've spoken to them, we've told them why we're here and what's going on, and the cascading effects of that, second, third, fourth order effects, would be their responses and how that plays out. Okay? That's called effects-based targeting. Now, back to my original claim, what I was telling you all, is if you have a bad ontology and you have bad situational awareness, then all of those other processes are going to lead to bad effects. And so, before situational awareness, I think you have to have a good ontology. That's my point. Okay, let's go down a little bit more. Okay, so this is just a quick quote back from 2014, where this kind of goes along with what I'm claiming here. Is that I'm going to go full screen here. I'm not going to be able to see you all. So if anyone has a question, just speak up and then I'll know, because I'm going to lose the ability to see you here when I go full screen. I'm not here. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is what I was saying, folks. This is General Nagata, who says, look, the ideology behind driving ISIS or Daesh, whatever you want to call it, we don't get it. We don't understand it. We're not even close to understanding it. And my claim is we don't have a good ontological framework. What we do, they're just not using it to move forward. So we don't understand the networks. We don't understand how they interact with each other. We don't understand what they're thinking, how they're feeling, etc., etc. So this is what we're after. If you see slide number 4 here, you see the interaction between, this kind of Venn diagram type structure on the left there. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 domains that we're interested in. Social interactions, military interactions, the infrastructure, economic domain, political domain, and information. Oh, okay. All right, so the orders of reality, you're probably all pretty familiar with those. And actually, I got a lot of good comments on those orders of reality because we tend to mess those up. We think of the real world as data. And so I like to keep that straight. First order reality being the actual nodes and links, so the actual people, buildings, IEDs going off, market activities, et cetera, et cetera. And then second order is reality is the way we take in that sense data and represent it in our mental representations of that. That would be your situational awareness. And then the third order reality is the way we try to create terrain models and different representations that represent second order, and first order reality. That's the common operating picture. Okay, let me scroll down here. So again, remember I'm at Westport talking to the Network Science Center, and what we mean by a network, it's a system of people or things. Well, it's pretty wide open. People are things, and so are events. It's a large and widely distributed group of people or things such as stores, colleges, churches, etc. One thing they don't have in here is they don't consider an occurrent. But I would say that the occurrence are nodes in the graph. Maybe they'll say their relationships, but I think BFO occurrence. Like for example, think of the picture on the right as an ontology of the Ducati engine. It's got all the pieces and parts, and you could, if you had a mechanic in the room, that mechanic could do what? Well, he could tell you how the parts are related, how they go together, what their functionality is. So the mechanic could talk about the engine in terms of an or subtype hierarchy. He could also expand from there and talk about the engine as part whole, neurologically. He could describe the engine, how the parts go together. He could do functional analysis. He could talk about the dispositions of each part. He could talk about the capability of the engine. Now, if we think of everything I just said about the engine, this is what we want to do with the operating environment. We want to talk about not just an or subtype hierarchy. We want to go out from there, and we want to talk about neurological relationships. We want to talk about familial, functional dispositions of people to behave a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. But this slide, actually, when I put it in, I hesitated, but it generated so much discussion both at Princeton and at West Point. So you think of that engine as some culture or some operating environment. Okay, so now we're getting into link analysis a little bit more. So here we want to study the relationships between the nodes. Now again, remember, for Bill Mandrick, I think the nodes don't just include physical objects. I think nodes also include discrete events, occurrence, and the relationships between them. I'm on the slide that says number 8, link analysis. Okay, and you can see in the bottom comment there, it's been used to investigate criminal activity, counterterrorism, computer security, search engine optimization, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously we use that to look at stabilization and market activities, et cetera. Now, a good friend of mine is an anthropologist. He's an Army guy, anthropologist. He every day would talk to the combatant commander. So here's my friend briefing the 3-star general every day on the links and the nodes within Afghanistan and how the people were associated with each other at the tribal level, the individual level, family level, professional, economic relationships. And it took him months and months to start to see how the relationships actually played out. And then from that, they were able to start to make predictions about how people would behave in certain situations. Okay. And that of course, is what we call social network analysis. Slide 9. We'll keep going. Creating nodes and links. We can skip that. Just kind of go through that slide. Now here's a slide. Oh, I don't have a slide number on this one. This is a picture of a node, a a link and a bank. If you can see that one.
Slide
It's the next one.
It's a very simple relation depiction.
Yeah, we have the bank.
Okay, so now the reason this is in here is I want you all to think about here's a young 19-year-old person who comes out of high school and they say, you know, I'm not ready to go to college. I want to be an intel analyst. Somehow they just, I don't know how they would think that, why they would think that, but they think I'm going to go in the service and I'm going to become an analyst, and I want to study social network analysis. So you can actually see right out of the manual where they teach a class on how to do social network analysis or network analysis. So here you have a person who's linked to some bank, obviously, but think of all the other thousands and thousands of relationships that can be between two nodes. And so what I'm saying to the military is that in order to make sense of all these thousands and thousands of types of relationships and nodes, BFO would be greatly beneficial to what you're doing, because that way you can keep straight all the nodes. And actually, a node in a graph is just a roll of something. So let's say that building, you're looking at that building and it says bank on it. Well, the building's not a bank. The building's just a structure. It's just a facility. It's an artifact, if you want to, speak in BFO terms. The fact that it's a bank, that's a defined class. A bank is a building where banking activities happen. But we don't keep that straight. And what I'm saying is, unless you start to get this straight, you're not going to be able to make sense out of your data and your situational awareness when you say things like building is a bank. Because you know what, at night that might be something different. And that person, think of all the roles that a person can do. Commander, banker, father, engineer, bomb maker. But anyway, this is how we train our analysts to think about the operating environment. And I know it's kind of blurry there, but you can see number 2, the soldier, here's the task. Soldier located elements of information from available sources across the following factors. So they have these factors, they're buckets. So they want information on areas or places, physical structures, organizations, people, events, etc. Those buckets sound a lot like category terms, because they are. But I think what they're lacking here is, that's as deep as it goes. And then they just leave the analyst up to figure out what they mean by structures, organizations, people, and events. You can drill down any way you want. What I'm proposing is that they need more discipline in this. They need to make it more precise. Okay, let me see where we're at here. Let me know if there's any questions. Let's talk about the next 2 slides real quick. So I'm on slide number 12. It says civil considerations matched to ASCOPE.
Yeah, we have that.
Okay, so here's where the social analyst, the social network analyst, is thinking about the domain, and they want to put what they've learned into these buckets that you see up top. And when I say buckets, I'm calling them buckets because I don't want to call them categories, because I guess they are categories in some sense. So you see across the top, they have area, structure, capabilities, organizations, people, and events. So, and as you go down, you see under areas, they have tribes, they have ethnicity. Well, ethnicity is not an area, that's an ethnicity. So obviously what they're saying there is there's some area that there's a concentration of some ethnicity. Well, that skips over a whole lot of metaphysics and ontology required to say, okay, there's this ethnicity, the person is the bearer of this ethnicity, and they have a location in some area, and there's a high concentration of these people, but there's nothing necessarily going on there that ties ethnicity to an area. So my point here is that these buckets are not well thought out. They're kind of rough, and they kind of make sense to the human. We can look at them. Let's just pick another one at random. If you go across the top to people, and you go straight down, and the first thing you see are phones. Well, oh my goodness. So obviously what they mean there is a person is the owner of some phone. They possess that phone, and but someone else can take it from them, or they can lose it. People make speeches, I guess, there. But again, none of this is worked out very rigorously. So it leads to a lot of problems. Once the data is created, it probably just sits in a repository and never gets reused because of these problems. Let's go down the capabilities column there. Because in BFO, capability is probably what we're going to say, it's something realizable. It's a realizable entity. So the capability exists, and it plays out in some event. And so these are the capabilities we're interested in. Sewers, you want clean water, drinking water, you want electricity turned on, you want the education system going, you're going straight down here. Trash pickup capability, medical, very large and rough buckets. So again, the takeaway here is that these need to be worked out better. And I've briefed this to the point where they're pretty much the analysts and their traders say, yeah, this needs to be worked out more. So to do that, they came up with the ASCOPE PMESII. I'm on the next slide there. And so ASCOPE, on the side, you see areas, structures, capabilities, organizations, people, and events. And across the top, we have no other categories: political, military, economic. That's the PMESII thing that we were talking about earlier. So all you do is you just line those up. So you've got political areas, political structures, political capabilities, economic areas, so that would be like a marketplace, economic structures, like again, a building that's a bank or a store or a marketplace, economic capabilities, organizations, people, businessmen, etc. And then economic events, meaning market events or anything that affects the economy. So again, we're getting closer now. We're getting a little bit more accurate, but it's not quite where we need to be. So I actually, one of the briefings that I was going to include some of the slides, and I just didn't do it because of time constraints, was I briefed the people that think about this stuff. I briefed them on BFO, and they concurred that it's a much more accurate and much more rigorous way of describing what it is they need to describe. All right, so
Bill?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain what dead space technical penetration is in the top right-hand corner?
Okay, so there you've got information in areas. You go down areas and then information. So dead space is where we just don't know what's in there. Or it's dead space because it might be a desert, it might be forested area, or it might just be where there's no technology in there. So in other words, it's a dead space where information, the only way it's getting in or out is by word of mouth. There's no phones, there's no internet, there's no satellite, etc.
What about religion? I don't see religion here.
Yeah. So that would be, yeah. Right, exactly. So that religion may fall under social. Right.
Hey, Bill, what's the rationale for having?
Religion doesn't even get considered here.
What's
So
the
again, I'm sorry?
Sorry, Bill. I'm wondering about the fact that you have all of these different types of events, but a lot of events would involve all of them. So, what's the criteria for saying that something's a political event, a military event, an economic event, a social event?
Yeah, precisely. There's so much overlap here that, okay, so let's talk about data stovepipes here and multiple inheritance.
Yeah.
We all know that this matrix, if you want to call it a matrix, this is the work of people that are like, hey, how do we make sense of this? And as soon as you start to drill down, it falls apart, or you start to see all the issues with it. And so it's not very hard to go in and say, look, this isn't very well thought out, which was the point of this slide. And what actually someone took this and they tried to like really fill it in and account for what you're saying, Neil, and it was really it was impossible to do.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, a social event is probably also a political and economic event, right? So the point of this slide isn't to show a solution; it's to show what some humans came up with, trying to make sense out of it. And then what happens is data is created, and as you all know, that it becomes stovepipe because you can't find it, you can't unless you tag it up more consistently. It just sits in a repository, and it's not data that could be useful. You just can't find it. So right. So let me scroll down here. I'm scrolling down. This is basically where I just showed them. I have a set. I'm not proposing this as the set of relationships, but this is just some sample relationships. And what I was saying to my audience at this point was, we have to have classes in a taxonomy, in is a subtype taxonomy, and then you have to develop domain-specific ontologies with relationships. And then I got concurrence there. So none of this has been worked out in my world, and I'm hoping that we can do that. So when we have, for example, two people, and one is, if you look on the relationship, the left column there, we have social relationships, like an acquaintance, that's pretty wide open. Adversary, enemy, associate, friend, member of. Again, these were just suggestions to the group to say, hey, this can be done much more accurately, and then not only do we have machine or human understanding and reasoning, but you can apply machine reasoning to these statements. And you can just survey those relations. And again, I think there's probably a set of a couple hundred relationships that we could get this down to. Much better than what they have. All right.
Bill, I have a question, if that's okay.
I'm on the conclusions slide.
We have a question here for you, Bill.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bill, I'm curious, prior to thinking about the obvious problems with the way data is organized before we come in with Buffaloized, was there a standard in place by which an operational environment was measured to determine whether or not it was effective, or organizing the data in that environment was effective or not?
Yeah, so there's man, that's a good, very, that question opened up a lot of different ways I could take that.
Okay.
So let me start with this, the question about the data. The Department of Defense and the Department of State and the U.S. government, they have instructions and directives on how data should be organized and how it should be stored and the models that should be used. The problem is, and Barry can speak to this probably better than I can, is either people don't follow the directives or the directives, they don't really get you much because they don't understand how to do it properly. So I think what I'm saying, this is not attributional, I hope. You can't attribute this to me, is what well, maybe. We don't, our government is not storing data the way it should be stored. And therefore you can't find it when you need it. And we're spending a lot of money on this problem. And it's just not being done the right way. So yes, there are standards. Now, another aspect of this is when you think of people, like young guys and gals that are intel analysts or social network analysts, they're not thinking about data storage and the proper way to tag up reports so that it can be found later. They're looking at first order reality and they're trying to make sense out of it, and they don't really care about machine reasoning that would really help them out a lot. They're under the stress and strain of trying to have to figure it out right then and there. Who's who? Who's related to what? Who set off this IED? Who's this sniper? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? So what they're doing is they're trying to think of the operating environment. It looks disciplined, but it could be much better. And there are doctrinal manuals that have all these frameworks in them. You saw two of them, PMESII and ASCOPE. Actually, PMESII and ASCOPE, they kind of work for just a staff. But as soon as you start to apply reasoning to it and the possibility of having powerful machine reasoning, that's where it just starts to fall apart. And then if you say, hey, well, there's this DoD directive on how to store data and how to create data and make it interoperate. As soon as you say that, people start saying, well, we don't have the time, it's very expensive. So the answer to your question is yes, there are standards, there are directives, there are these set data models, if you want to call them that, but they're not very good.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know off the top of your head, is there a way to measure the success of Buffo in comparison to these older standards? Other than the obvious, which is what we've been belaboring here, the multiple inheritance stuff, but like predictive data, like accuracy, stuff like that?
Here's what I'd like you to do. It sounds like you've thought about this just based on your question.
Just a little bit.
So, what I'd like you to do is get that. I think the answer is no. The answer is I don't know. We have these ORSA guys, and they're operational research people that look at these problems and they try to find measurements and what we call metrics. What I'd like you to do is get your question to like a very concise sentence or two or three, and I would love to look that up.
Cool. Sounds good.
And before you write it down and get it to Barry and whoever, ask it one more time to your side, because I want to see if I have a short answer for you before I go.
Simply put, I'm curious as to how you would measure the success of implementing Buffo in these various operational environments as opposed to previous models.
Oh, okay. So here's the problem with that question. I think because the data problem is so big, I think it would be easy to find data that says, look, your data models just stink because no. There?
We are indeed, yes.
Okay. Barry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay. All right, it's back to normal. It's either listening or trying to shut us down. Yeah, I think there's lots of evidence to show that the efforts they have to date just have not worked. The effort that was just shut down a couple weeks ago was very expensive, very politically powerful, and never worked from the inception. And I was at one briefing where I said to these pretty high-level people, I said, look, if you don't do BFO, you need to do something because the approach you have is just not ever going to work. And they didn't listen. And I think since then, that was the effort that was shut down. But
So
you have to think of the government as a ship, and steering a ship it doesn't turn on a dime. And I think it was Winston Churchill said, the Americans will always do what's right, they just try everything else first. And I think that's now I think that another part of your question, like, have we shown that BFO gets a better result? Yeah, I think clearly we can show that too. So please, again, get this down to, it sounds like you've got a pretty good question there. And let's see if I can get you a better answer.
So Bill, I can give you a sort of an answer.
Yeah, please.
When I first started working on biomedical ontology, I worked closely with a Belgian gentleman by the name of Coisters, who is now working here in Buffalo, Ceusters. And he had a company, the job of which was to analyze medical data. And he had working for him 40 medical, they were actually trained doctors, but they couldn't work in Belgium as doctors, so they were working for him as medical data analysts. And he had operations research style metrics to measure the success of what they were doing. And he incorporated BFO-based rules into their analysis processes and was able to show that incorporating those rules gave rise to a greater productivity. And an example of one such rule is he produced a list of words which are very often confusing because they have readings which are both occurrent readings and continuant readings.
Yeah.
An example would be the word poisoning. Poisoning can mean the act of poisoning, but it can also mean the result of poisoning. And when you make the people doing the coding follow those rules, they just do more efficient work because their work doesn't need to be corrected so often. And so I think you could do something similar for your kind of case.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues we have, like the coding example, I call it conflation, and one of the biggest mistakes we make when we're trying to build these models or these representations or these matrices or these aids for memorization, we conflate an event with its with the thing's disposition, with the data. We conflate dissimilar things, and then we just have the wrong thought process, and from that we start to report it incorrectly and think about it incorrectly, and with a little bit of ontological discipline, a lot of that can be avoided.
I have another question. You mentioned earlier that these were 19-year-olds who become intelligence analysts.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the career track is that they managed to acquire such a position at the age of 19?
Yeah, so my son is at the University of Pittsburgh. He's studying, he's a philosophy major in information science. And he called me the other day and said, Dad, this college stuff, I like it and all, but I think I want to try following in your footsteps. And I said, well, you need to call the recruiter. They're on campus, and you need to talk to them. And you need to go in and take it's the ASVAB. The ASVAB is we like acronyms in the Army, in the military. ASVAB is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So it's a battery of tests that tell anyone, you can take it in high school if you want, you can take it at 17 years old. It just tells you what skills you're good at. And you have to become an intel analyst, you have to get a certain score. And so he took the test and they said, yeah, you can be an intelligence analyst. You go to Fort Huachuca, Arizona for, it's a pretty long course. You'd have to take time off from college. Most people do it coming right out of high school. Like myself, I didn't want to go to college right away. I wanted to go into the service. So you take the ASVAB and then it tells you, yeah, you can do this, and no, you can't do that. If you get a high enough score, Intel analyst is pretty, you got to get a really high score to get that. Most college students score high enough. And so then what you do is you go through basic combat training, also known as boot camp. And that's where you're learning your basic military, how to march, how to shoot a weapon, how to clean a weapon, what the rank structures are, et cetera, et cetera. So you finish that up, and then you go to advanced individual training for intelligences out at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And that could be, now there's different branches of intelligence. You've got general intelligence, you've got intelligence systems, where you become a specialist in setting up all the technology. You've got cryptolinguists, cryptologists. There's probably 8 or 10 or 12 different fields within intelligence that you can go for. Now that's the enlisted route. That's not becoming an officer. That's you're going to be an enlisted person. You're going to go up through the sergeant ranks, and that's a very rewarding career. And he's thinking about it right now. So that's that training. I think the minimum training for Intel analysts is 4 additional months, and then once you get through that, you go to your first assignment, which you would be in a real, regular Army unit, and you would work as an entry level intelligence analyst, or cryptolinguist, or whatever it is. I think most of your learning probably happens once you get to your assignment, more than in the school. All right. So, I'm not a recruiter, so let's do that. And you go to your recruiters that are on campus. I just thought, he's interested in information science. He loves philosophy. He actually started the philosophy club in his high school, and I said, look, and I've never pushed either of my sons into the military. As a matter of fact, I never really talked about it with them very much. But they saw me, they watched Dad growing up, and I said to him, look, I do think this would be a good job for you, because of the things he likes to do and the books he likes to read. He loves to analyze text. His favorite subjects were always reading and analyzing what was meant. And so I thought, Intel analyst, that would be good for you. And so we'll see what happens. But if you're interested in that, just I will talk to you about it. I'll let you know how to do it. But again, I'm not a recruiter for that. But that brings up another point. So if you have questions about anything we've talked about, Barry has my contact information, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. 2 summers ago, last summer, I was at the SOC North. SOC North is Special Operations Command Northern Hemisphere. That's Mexico, U.S., and Canada. And I was asked to give a lecture to all the SOC North people on foreign fighters. Now, obviously, if you're watching the news, foreign fighters are a big issue. So a foreign fighter is anyone that leaves their country to go fight with with ISIS, Daesh, Boko Haram, et cetera, et cetera. So what I did is talking to my boss down at Joint Special Operations University. He said, "Why don't you look at it from an ontological perspective?" And that's what I did. So here's the result. That was the title. I'm on slide 19, Foreign Fighters, Whose Problem Is It? That was actually the lecture series. And what I talked about here was something we had already discussed earlier, complexity and reductionist staff approaches. So my friend wrote that article. It was in the Small Wars Journal. Small Wars Journal means anything that's not a conventional war. So any insurgency, any insurrection, any movement that becomes violent, that's what they mean by small war. And what my friend wrote an article, his name is Dr. Chris Varhola, he's a colonel like me. He said, look, what we do is we don't do enough deal analysis of the problem, and then we start making decisions based upon these dubious facts. And it was actually a very good article, very hard hitting, and he and I started talking about BFO, and he loves it. And I think he just wrote a monograph on understanding tribes and culture, and I think he used a lot of what we had discussed. I have to go look at it. I haven't read it yet. But anyway, so that's complexity reduction staff approaches. Then we have this notion of femto risks, which is a small event that sets off a chain reaction. And again, remember, the analyst, the targeting analyst, the intel analyst, the social networking analyst, is you want to look for an event that doesn't, the first order effect is the event and the immediate aftermath. But really what we're interested in is the cascading third, fourth, fifth order effects. So for example, I'll give you a kind of a recent example. Zika virus. The first order effects would be people getting sick and maybe dying from that. But the second, third, fourth order effects, I guess children are being born with severely undersized heads, lots of problems. So another effect would be the government saying, don't have kids, don't have children. And then what effect is that going to have on the economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be, and if you're going to say Zika virus is a femto risk, if you could show the connection between that event or series of events, seemingly small events, and they have these global impact. Okay, so I'm on slide 20. I hope you've seen my screen there. Complexity and reduction of staff approaches in stability operations. So at the bottom there, you can see the link to that article in Small Wars Journal that my friend wrote. I think what I'm saying is when we don't have a good ontology, we often create and operate off of dubious quote-unquote facts. And what he meant by facts was they're not really facts at all. They're only facts because we say they are. Once they're published or hung, they gain institutional significance. That means we start acting upon them. He's calling for a new set of hypotheses, and he wants to be more scientific in our approach to understanding these complex operating environments. He's, of course, an anthropologist. Okay. So, femto risk. All right, so here's an article on femto risk. Here. So it's a small-scale, numerically insignificant danger inherent in any system. So, the thing that causes the catastrophic event, the plane to crash, or something small, a wire that catches fire and then the plane crashes. But these risks are perceived as extremely unlikely or small, but because of interconnections or changes in the system, this is what we're looking at. As these are the things that keep combatant commanders up at night. What if Boko Haram does this? What if ISIS does this? What if, So a very small movement has catastrophic effects. This was at the Princeton lecture. So this global systemic risk. Again, what I'm saying is, you go back to our earlier set of slides, and you think of those buckets or those categories that they were trying to sort through. You're not going to get from them to understanding global systemic risk. That's my claim. You have to have an ontology that is flexible and agile enough to drill down to the appropriate level of granularity. That's my claim here. All right. Data analytics and social media has just added a layer of complexity. Don't worry about echo and amplification. That was okay. So here's an interesting picture. If you can see slide 24, this was done at the Naval Postgraduate School when I was out there. This is a screenshot of, I don't know how they rendered these. This is 1 million tweets during the Arab Spring. And what they did, let me go on here, they drilled down into it, and they saw clusters around certain things. Names, sentiments, organizations, etc. So when I was out at Naval Postgraduate School, I said, there's an ontology here somewhere. And what we don't want to do is start confusing the data with first order reality. So we started to apply some BFO to this. I actually gave a presentation out there, and my study group, we got the best presentation, most provocative presentation we were there for a month, and that was our capstone exercise. And what we found is that data analytics, what they can reveal in social media, names, IP addresses of influential people, high frequency terms that are associated with trending topics, emerging sentiments, the relationships between persons and organizations, and how groups, we started to show how groups formed up. And we did some math, that there was actually some math that went along with that. I don't have it here with me, but we showed how quickly a thought can take off. Just with, if 20% of your friends like it, how quickly it takes off. And we briefed the commander and the ambassador on this, and they were blown away by it. What we can't show in data analytics are femtorisks. That they're by definition, you don't see them. Okay, let's not worry about this. And that. Here's where I wanted to get down to. No, skip that. We'll learn. Okay, I wanted to get to this slide. So, I started with my group. I said, let's ask a very basic question. When you say a foreign fighter, an insurgent, whatever you want to call them, what has to be there for them to be a threat, etc. So we have some person on slide 32. That person has some ideology. And there's your definitions of what an ideology is. They can't just have an ideology. Like maybe their ideology is my ideology is I must protect the Ummah, the family of Islam. I must live a holy life according to my tribal and religious beliefs. Whatever those ideologies are. They have a set of ideologies, and they they're not just the holder of that ideology. They intend to go over to the right there. They intend to act on it. They say, look, I have an ideology. I intend to act on it. And I just realized as I said that one thing I don't have in here is they have, from the ideology, they have to formulate a plan they form the intent to act on it, and then they have to formulate a plan. So I didn't put the plan in. But anyway, okay, so add plan to this. They have to have the capability to do something. And they have to have the ways and means of doing it and the motive. Maybe I went out of order here. But here's what I'm saying. If all of these elements aren't in place, then you don't have an insurgent or foreign fighter, whatever title you're going to give them. And if you do have to have all these elements, well then what does that mean? So we can drill down a little bit. So this foreign fighter will be a participant. He'll have certain mental processes that will play out in certain behaviors. And my point in all of this was you have to drill down to the appropriate level of detail. And these were borrowed from the bio portal there. You see the link down there in the bottom row. So what I'm saying is we need to look at affective signs with an A, and that is to say, sense data coming in, you process it, it results in certain physiochemical processes in the brain and the body, certain that results in certain mental processes, and then those are related to some set of behaviors. My point wasn't to resolve it, my point was to say to the Joint Special Operations Community that we have to drill down more to understand these complex phenomena. Like, why does a person behave the way they do? Well, it's not a simple question. There's a whole science behind it. Okay. Future of viral conflict. These are the lines of Rojava, and they are, I think, some of they're a spin-off of the Peshmerga. They are Kurdish, and they are fighting against you. If you look at this slide, this is slide 35. Those people are foreign. You see an Australian in there; he was killed. You've got some Greeks going down there, British going to fight with the lines of Rojava. So here, my point in this was the foreign fighters. Let me go back a slide. The future of viral conflict. So think about it this way: you've got ISIS, Daesh, Boko Haram, and you've got foreign fighters from Middle East countries, even from Europe, even from America, going to fight for ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, Boko Haram, and the other groups that are out there. But on the other side of that, you've got these people, these examples here, like the lines of Rojava. Well, they're fighting against ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, etc., etc. And you've got Australians, Brits, Germans, etc. going now. So they're foreign fighters for the other side of the conflict. Now, folks, what I'm telling you is this is a very, very, talk about femto risks. Now you've got foreign fighters going in for both sides. Where in war, usually it's government versus government. Now it's interest group versus interest group. And then how do you fund that? Well, you all have seen GoFundMe, right? And so here, you see the little puppy down there needs legs, and Michelle needs money for surgery, et cetera, et cetera. And I was making a joke about this, but so this does not exist, but this was my joke: fund my conflict, where the lines of Rojava need money for weapons and ammunition. These Bugatti tribal militiamen need money for new camo equipment. Well, I said this joking, but within a couple weeks of me saying this, don't you know that this is happening? So now I want you all to think of something as we're discussing this. Traditionally, war was fought between two countries. They couldn't resolve their political differences, so they ended up going to war. The war was fought under the Geneva Conventions. You couldn't do certain things. You had to treat prisoners of war a certain way. You couldn't use certain weapons. You couldn't use chemical weapons. They outlawed biological weapons. So in other words, you had warfare that was legally sanctioned under the Geneva Conventions, international law. It was funded by your government. And at the end of the war, there was a winner and a loser, and you signed a treaty, and people went home, and they went on with their lives, etc. Now we have groups starting up online, social media. They form up their groups. They find out what capabilities they need. They link up on social media. They can even raise money. And now you've got foreign fighters on both sides going in. So if you want to fight for the side of the Islamic extremists or you want to fight against them, you can go join them. So these are some scary thoughts. And my recommendations were pretty simple. We need a good framework to make sense of
Can I
this.
say
I
something?
think BFO helps make sense of all of these.
We have a question for you, Bill.
Absolutely.
Yeah, about the both sides of the conflict, like founded by different foreign fighters for both sides. I was thinking that this is not something completely true because, for instance, during the Spanish Civil War, you had volunteers for the Republicans and volunteers for the Nationalists. So this was something really similar to what is going on here. And they use something like 30s social network to join the conflict. So
Good. So are you saying that this appears to be a new phenomenon, but really it's not. This has been going on
yeah,
for
yeah,
a long time. Yeah,
exactly.
okay, I'll buy that. I'll definitely buy that. I think what my point here is it's happening much faster, and it's happening on social media, which is the new way to do things, and it's playing out so that I foresee a time where an entire war can be fought without some sanctioning government. It can be fought between groups, fought online, money raised online. They share their tactics online. They communicate online. I think that's my point there. But yeah, that's a good point. I think you're right.
So the challenge would be to find an example earlier which was not a case of civil war. And there may be such examples.
Yeah.
And also, I think you can't go very back in time because to have foreign fighters, you need to have countries. Because you can't be a foreigner unless you have a native country. So we can't go back to the pre-civilizational era and claim precursors there. Although then it may be that we are going back to a pre-civilizational era.
Yeah, it's places. I think that's what they want.
Any more
Okay.
questions?
Any more questions on that?
Okay. Yeah.
Let me try to make sure he can understand me.
Okay.
Okay. I have a general question. I see you collect a lot of data to analyze in terms of social media, and you have an ontology. I mean, you have, in my view, a big data problem here. But my question is, do you use the effect-based operation model, that framework?
I'm sorry, ask that last part again.
Effect-based operation,
Do we use that?
EBO.
Yeah. Do we use that? Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
I think the problem is when you can EBO, effects-based operations, was always it's initially, not always, but initially it was used for artillery, so that the immediate effect was, okay, we hit that target with artillery. So what's the first order effect of that? Well, the target was blown up. But let's say the target was a bridge or a hospital. We didn't know it was a hospital or it was a bridge. Now, if you blow up a bridge, first order effect, bridge is gone. Big explosion, bridge is gone. Second order effect, people have to modify their behaviors. They can't use the bridge anymore. Third order effect is now they're angry because the bridge is gone and they have to find a different route into and out of the city. Now the cascading fourth, fifth, sixth order effects of that would be anger. They join they're like, hey, these people are here, they're blowing our bridges up, they're making our lives miserable, and I'm gonna join the insurgency. And so what we have to do is go to the commander and say, sir, we understand that the bad guys are using that bridge. Got it. We want to blow it up. However, here's what's going to happen if you do that. Here's the EBO analysis of that. But now what we have to do, that's the artillery example. Now we have to be able to look at big data, social media, and look at the interactions there and try to make those same types of predictions just from observing the interactions of tweets and clusters around people and IP addresses and things like that. So it's applying EBO to a whole new domain, is I guess what I'm saying.
Okay. Fire away, Bill.
Okay. So this is a little bit more down at the more what I'd call the tactical level, down where the rubber meets the road. This is Barry and I had gone to work with the Air Force Research Lab in Ohio, and this is a slide deck that I presented some thoughts to them and how they could use BFO to understand the global mobility enterprise better. Now again, we have these notions of global mobility enterprise, and then when you start to drill down on that, you realize, you start asking these people that came up with these terms that they have an understanding of it, but if you really scrutinize it, it starts to fall apart, but it's the closest thing you have to a good description. So I guess what I'm saying is the Department of Defense, the military, the U.S. government, Department of State, we're really good at describing the world. We're the best at it. But if you set some ontologies in there, it starts to fall apart, and you see that you need a little better process. All right. So here's the agenda. I'm going to give you a little opening vignette. I'm going to talk about this joint capabilities integration. I think I'll skip over that. BFO and levels of granularity. I don't want to bore you. I'll just cover it real quickly. Talk about I will talk about how that helps you understand this notion of the global mobility enterprise. And then within the global mobility enterprise, there's one little event that they call non-destructive inspection. It happens within the global mobility enterprise, and that's to make the point about the level of granularity. And then a closing example, vignette. We call them vignettes. They're little examples that make the point. Okay, so back to that earlier point about this foreign fighter thing's nothing new. Well, big data is really nothing new. It's just bigger now. And what I mean by that is, here's this fellow. I just read this a couple months ago about this Matthew Fontaine Mulry, and he was in the Navy, and he ended up breaking his leg, so he couldn't serve on a ship. So they put him in charge of all the charts, the naval charts, and it was the perfect job for him. He fell in love with this job, and he started analyzing all these charts and all the data on them and all the instruments that produced the data. And he just, I think they probably put him there to get rid of him, and he became a big pain in the neck to everybody, but in a good way. So up to that point, you can see, starting at the top there, generations of sailors and seafarers, they would navigate based upon advice and folklore. A lot of times this advice or folklore would send them directly into calms, or put them against opposing winds, currents, and in the worst cases, it would triple their route lengths in order to avoid these non-existent hazards. So, for example, New York to Rio de Janeiro, a a lot of times they would go 3 times the route distance just to avoid these things that weren't really there. Matthew Fontaine Murray comes along. He's known as the pathfinder of the seas, or the father of modern oceanography, meteorology. He was the first to write a book on nautical science, and he saw patterns in wind, tidal, and current events. He interviewed everybody he could get his hands on. He studied their instruments and how they produce data and information. So on slide 42, there's the book he wrote. He actually started crowdsourcing in 1842. So he went to each ship and talked to the people who were putting the data into the logs and said, look, I want to standardize this. And this is exactly what the Department of Defense needs right now, a way to standardize the way things are reported. He created a citizen science, which was, hey, everybody on the ship, every ship should be a floating observatory and repository of data. As you can see there in the bullets, he created an entirely new form of standardized navigational chart. So up until that time, everybody was making their own charts. They had their own standards for how to put data in there. And you could see why nobody would go back and use that. So here they are creating all this data, and it would sit in logbooks, never to be looked at again. Well, he opened them up, and he was looking for commonalities between them. And I think what if he were alive today, what he would want to do with those old logs is tag them up with category terms that were consistent. So if you go down to the bottom there, the last 2 bullets, natural ceilings presented themselves from the data. Folks, that's the data analyst that finds some trend that nobody saw, and it just jumps out at you. And there's a strong correlation between the data and something out in the world that he cut long voyages by about 1/3. And when they say he saved merchants a lot of money, it was a lot of money. He became very famous overnight. Well, not overnight, but once this caught on and they realized how much money they were saving. But what he had to do is he had to find the commonalities in the data and how to string it together. This is exactly what we're trying to do within the Department of Defense. Let's skip over. Oh, well, I will say this about the J6 process. What I'm proposing, and the reason I use that vignette, is I believe that capability needs to be developed within the U.S. government and Department of Defense. And what do I mean by that? I'm saying we need to develop that type of capability where we can take mounds of data, and from that those sea lanes will open up to us. We'll see trends, we'll see strong correlations. And we need to do that. I think BFO plays a large part in this. We need to standardize the way we report the data, the way we put it into reports, et cetera, et cetera. And then goes back to our example of Fontaine, those sea lanes will open up to us from the data. Okay, you all are familiar with BFO. We presented this to, the reason I used this slide was to show that BFO is not really big. You're not talking about thousands of terms or even hundreds. And you can with this framework, you can describe your domain by drilling down from here with a small set of relationships, and you get a much more accurate result. And what do I mean by that? It's a much more accurate result than getting 2 smart guys or gals in a room and saying, hey, let's come up with some categories that describe this domain, because that's what we do, that's what we've always done. But what we're saying now is no, start from BFO and then go forward with your process. And it will constrain you from saying back to that statement about folklore. We don't want folklore. We don't want people making up stories and neat ways of describing them. We want a consistent way of describing these things. And I think BFO is the way to do it. There's another rendering of BFO. Probably most of you have seen that one. And again, the point isn't to bore you all. You're familiar with this. My point was to show, look, here's the framework. If you start with this, you're going to be much further down the road than literally just. It reminds me of I went into a meeting once where they were going to create a disease ontology, and I would not have believed this if I didn't see it for myself. And when I went to the meeting, they were going to create an ontology of disease types. And I said, "Oh, this will be wonderful." And I could tell they did not want me in the room. And I think the reason why they didn't want me in the room will be evident here in a minute. As they started to, they pull out all this data, these data sets, and they're looking at them, and they start putting together kind of like the ASCOPE PMESII type thing. So I'm in the back room with my iPhone, and I Google disease ontology. Well, a real one came up from an epidemiologist or doctor. I said, well, why don't you just use this one? And boy, you'd have thought somebody did something really inappropriate. And the point I'm trying to make here is they were getting paid to come up with an ontology. And it didn't matter that these things already existed. And it didn't matter that they didn't have a methodology. They were data scientists, they were data people, engineers, architects, and they were paid to do a task. We could have saved a lot of money by just using what already existed. All right, you're all probably familiar with this, levels of granularity, where you can go from the organism down to the molecule, go from phenotypic qualities down to molecular functions, molecular processes, higher level biological processes, etc. So my point here is just getting to the right level of granularity. Okay, so with those thoughts in mind, here is Air Force doctrine, and I have a red circle there on the global mobility enterprise. So I was like, oh, okay, well, let me click on that, and I opened it up, and it's a whole doctrinal manual that describes the global mobility enterprise. Here's the doctrinal definition for the global mobility enterprise. And in red, I marked some of the things that jumped out at me, some of the ontological elements, like the nodes in the graph. Air mobility operations, so an event, or in the current. Airmen, so an airman would be a person in that role. Equipment, all sorts of equipment, pieces of equipment, artifacts. Infrastructure, they make up the infrastructure. So that would be equipment, buildings, artifacts that are in a relationship to each other. And then command and control would be a set of processes that make up the command and control process. And then you've got this overall environment, again, that has to be decomposed from BFO. And then operations, processes, airfields down at the bottom there, aerial ports of embarkation, aerial ports of debarkation, staging bases, forward operating bases. So my point here was that here you've got this definition for global mobility enterprise, and it's just a mashup of all these dissimilar things. So on to the next slide, to start to unpack that, I said, look, here's all the things you have in there. It's a lot. Because when you're talking about a facility, because that was in there, you've got ports, airfields, airheads, airports, air terminal, operating bases. You've got vehicles. Under that, you've got aircraft, types of aircraft, fixed wing, jets, propeller, rotary wing, unmanned aerial vehicles. My point in all this, folks, was that look, you've got this definition, and there's a lot in there. So this is a human-friendly definition, but when you start to unpack it, there's a lot in there, and it goes on. So here's the slide 50, elements of the global mobility enterprise. You have some airlift organization. It has members, they're airmen. It has a location at some operating base. Part of the operating base would be an airfield. Back to the top to the organization. The organization is the bearer of some airlift capability. So an airlift organization necessarily has an airlift capability, and that's defined in doctrine. That capability is realized through airlift operations. And airlift operation has participants, people, aircraft, etc. And I was trying to show the logic that's involved here. And you might have some aircraft that is the bearer of some function. I'm on slide 51. It's the bearer of some aircraft function. It's also the bearer of some capability. So the aircraft has a function. It could be anti-submarine, it could be attack, bombing, fighting, patrolling, reconnaissance, training, etc., etc. That's its function. It's the bearer of that. It's also the bearer of the capability, what it's capable of doing. Transporting, thrust, takeoff. It could be a platform. It has certain maneuver capability, etc. So these functions and these capabilities are inherent in the aircraft, but you don't see them unless they're actually doing those functions or those capabilities. Here we have, I gave them a rendering from, I think this is Protege? No, this is, yes, Protege. And so we have fixed-wing aircraft. A subclass of that would be jet aircraft. And then you've got the F-16 Fighting Falcon, the Eagle, the Tomcat, the Galaxy. The Galaxy is the bearer of a transport function. It has part the General Electric TF-39 engine, and there's a picture of one, an instance of one, down at the bottom there. You see over to the left that the F-16 Fighting Falcon has part Pratt Whitney F-10 engine. It's the bearer of a fighting function, etc., etc. My point there is that we can say whatever we need to say about these aircraft, and then the machines can do the processing. Show me all aircraft with the Pratt Whitney F-10 engine, for example. Show all aircraft that are the bearer of a fighting function or a transport function, etc. So then I started to think, I'm on slide 53. I started to think, all right, we've got BFO, and then under BFO we have a set of common core ontologies for events, geospatial, qualities, agents, time, artifacts. And then we have data types. Now, I don't know why necessarily, maybe not data types, maybe that's not the right word, but you see that line going across there. And I started to pull out in color code, that's real data types, I guess is okay, that I pulled out from different manuals. Those are all real things. You have a geographic location code, a country code, geospatial coordinates, area names, country this. There's a whole bunch of them. So in orange, anything that has to do with a place, I have it there. The blue or purple you see there, that has to do with equipment. The red has to do with organizations or units. The brown has to do with events. The green has to do with people. Now, look, this is just a small sample of types of data. I color-coded it. But I think what needs to be really worked out, and I know at UB they have a good start on this, is the information artifact ontology. And I know Ron Rudnicki and Barry and some of the other people that have been doing a lot of work on this. I get a lot of interest when I get to this stuff. This is really needed to do what Fontaine Murray did on a larger scale to create that capability. We've got to work out types of data and figure out how to process it, think about it, how to use computers to organize it for us. That's going to be done, I think, through an information artifact ontology. let's see. All right, so now I was drilling down here to, again, trying to show how BFO can get to any level of granularity. So this is a training manual. See at the on that left-hand side there, you see TM 1-15,000-335-23, non-destructive inspection method, basic theory. Now, in your mind, think of, well, what is non-destructive inspection? We've got a piece of equipment, we want to inspect it, but we want to reuse it. We don't want to pull it apart. So a non-destructive inspection method, one example you see over on the right there, would be liquid penetrant inspection method. And what that does is, essentially what you're doing is you're using liquid that has color in it, purple or orange, something bright, and you're putting the part into this liquid, and then you put it under a special light, and it shows you. Now go down to the bottom there. You have this surface breaking discontinuity. In other words, it's a pit, a crack, or a hole in the part. Well, BFO we can account for all this in BFO, and then we can start to reason about the surface breaking discontinuities that were found because of the liquid penetrant inspection method. Now, I know this seems maybe trivial, but what I'm saying is BFO facilitates this reasoning. It is actually pretty powerful. So here's how it plays out, the way I see it. Over there, on the top left, you see the nose landing gear, hydraulic sub-assembly. That's a part on an aircraft up at the nose of the aircraft for the landing gear. It's under extreme pressure on landings. It has this disposition to crack, which is realized by some cracking event. And there you see an actual liquid penetrant inspection, and you see that green crack right there. Now this doesn't seem like rocket science, but I think what they probably realized at this point was basic formal ontology can really get us to any level of granularity we need to go. I imagine you could, for every crack, assign a unique identifier to it. And then you could start to reason about all the cracks that happen in all the nose landing hydraulic subassemblies. And I think now we're getting a much more powerful capability to reason about maintenance and fixing things and avoiding femto risks, etc. And I think we're closing out here. So then, that last set of thoughts led me to think, what do we measure? And I went through the NDI manual, and I just pulled out a handful of things that they measure, like brightness, viscosity, radiation, residual leakage, etc. So I think in closing here, what I'm saying is, if we want to be able to do what Commander Murray did for navigation, we want to have that same capability in areas like femto risks, cultural, social analysis, maintenance data, etc. And we want these shipping lanes or these navigational lanes to open up to us, as they did for Murray. We've got to have a methodology, and we've got to start to categorize these things accurately. And only then will we be able to standardize it and find those shipping lanes that he found. And I think, okay, my closing thing here is support that. Here is, I'm on slide 57. This is pattern analysis plot sheet. And let me explain this to you. So on that circle, you see 0, 1 going around to the clockwise. 1, 2, 3, all the way around to 2300. It's a 24-hour graphic representation of one 24-hour period. Now, what we do with these, if you go down to the bottom, you look at the legend down there, and you can see certain events, an assassination, a neighborhood raid or an attack, an IED went off, a sniper shot at somebody. Those are obviously pretty violent events. A mortar attack, a non-governmental organization incident, I don't know, that could be anything. A demonstration, maybe people got together to demonstrate, they have it broken down by Baathists and Shia. Now, what we found is that you have all these events. If you think about those events down at the bottom, they're happening every day. Does anyone have a guess as to why we want to plot those on that plot? So not every time a mortar attack goes off, or an IED, or an assassination, why do we want to plot it on a 24-hour period? Oh, and before anyone answers that, if you look in the middle of that circle, you can see the days of the month going outward 1 to 30 days in a month. Why do we want to plot those events on that time line, or that circle? Does anyone have a guess? Barry, I can't see you, so you'll have to.
Yeah. Anyone? I know the answer, so I can't speak.
Yeah. Someone hazard a guess. Neil, how about you?
Presumably, you're looking for correlations in time between like events.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
good.
And then, how about that Taliban guy? What do you think?
Well, I suppose certain bombing happen at certain times of the month more often. Or is that what you're after?
Yeah. So now, why do we, what can we surmise, or what can we think from there? We say, all right, all these IEDs, they're all going off at, or all the. Let's take assassination. Assassinations always happen between 0500 in the morning, very early in the morning, to 0700. So between 5 and 7 in the morning, virtually 95% of the assassinations happen between those times, or say IEDs. From that we can infer a lot of things, like, well, they want to do it when the sun's just coming up. Then let's say IEDs. All the IEDs are going off very early when it's still dark and the sun's just coming up. What do we do from there? Well, we also look during the time of month. Are they heavier at the end of the month, the middle of the month, the beginning of the month? What reason? Remember, go back to our EBO, our effects-based operations thinking. We want to look at it and say, look, there's a pattern here. Between the 20th and the 25th, between the hours of sunup, very early in the morning, it's still dark, maybe 04 to 06, all the IED events are happening right in there. Now you can start to ask questions about why do you think that's the case? And then we can alter our behaviors around that. So I guess what I'm saying is you want to take mounds and mounds of data and you want to plot it in a way so that you can see patterns. That's a lot like what Commander Maury did with the mounds and mounds of data he had. So what I'm telling all of you, I guess, is this is happy hunting ground. This is a field it's only going to get bigger, our ability to do this. And I think BFO plays a big part in this because I think BFO is going to help us categorize the data properly by type, by what its function is. And then once we do that, I think we're going to be able to do like Commander Maury did for shipping and sea lanes. I think we're going to be able to do it in other areas too. So with that, I open up to your questions.
So why don't you stop sharing your screen, Bill, and then we can see you. But first of all, you should explain what those people are doing jumping out of that.
Well, I use that because it looks like army guys with flippers on their feet jumping out of an Air Force aircraft. So in military world, that's just funny. And it should raise a lot of questions. Like, why do Army guys have flippers on their feet, jumping out of an aircraft into the water? So it was just kind of a joke. The only thing that would have made that picture better is if the guy in front was in some sort of submersible vehicle that was, you know, like one of those ducks that can go in or out of the water. That's the only thing that would have improved that picture. So now I will close that out. And I think I can maximize this. I can see you all, but I would like to make it bigger. Oh, there you are. Alright, now I can see you all.
Yeah, now we need to see you.
Oh,
So you need to turn on your video.
oh, video camera off. Okay, now I'm gonna click this, and if I go away, I guess I'll call you back. Alright. You see me?
Okay, there you are. I can
So,
make
yeah.
one bigger.
Covered a lot of ground, and my goal was not to make you experts in anything. And I've given many more of those presentations in many other fields. But if it sparks any thought, no matter how random or you know you think it is, if you have a question, please share. Because honestly, I give these presentations and someone will ask a question, and it will actually really help me work these things out. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Anyone?
So I have a general
Go ahead.
question. Yeah, I'm curious. So during your presentation, you mentioned some successes in your overtures and some failures. How successful have you been in teaching Buffo or ontology in general?
Wait, you're breaking. Try to ask something.
Am I breaking up now?
No, you're good.
Okay. How successful have you been in your overtures to the military in selling them the ontologies?
Okay, so remember back to I was saying about the military, the Department of Defense is a big ass shit. Right? So when someone says, "Hey, turn right," it ain't gonna happen like right away, right? That word is gonna go down to the steering room. They're gonna crank on the wheel, and several hours later, the ship's gonna start to go off. They're like, "Wow, this ship's much bigger than me." And what I'm getting right now is an acknowledgement that the methods are not working that they're using. Go back to that PMESII ASCOPE example. That's a room full of smart people like you all coming up with their best guess. How do we organize this information? Well, that's what they came up with. You know what? When it's a bunch of dudes sitting around in a warehouse trying to figure out who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, that works. But it also can create false narratives. And then we start doing the wrong things, and what it was originally intended for gets turned into something it never should have been used for. So back to your question, there's an acknowledgement now that the way we're storing data, or the way we're modeling it, and everything we're thinking about is not right. So I think, by way of analogy, where we're at is we've got Commander Mallory talking to all these naval navigators, and they're all saying, "You know what, this isn't working." And Mallory's saying, "Hey, I think I got a system." And they're saying, "Well, tell us about it." And they're like, "Yeah, you're right. This is better." So I think that's where we're at. I have no one's written Bill Mandrick a check at this point for $10 million and said, "Hey, take this $10 million, go up to UB and hire all those really smart grad students to help you figure this out." I would be the happiest guy alive when that happens.
Let me know when they do.
And I can hire all of you to help sort this out. Because so to me, like I'm done. I retire in a couple years. What I want to do, I read stories like Maury, Commander Maury, and that's the stuff that gets me excited still, right? Army stuff, whatever. I want to help figure out and open up these ceilings. That was like, to me when I read that, I was like, this is great stuff. And I know where the minds are that are going to sort this out. And it's not a bunch of Army guys are you got smart dudes, right? They're smart guys. They're not thinking about this. They need grad students. They need ontologists. They need philosophers. They need algorithmists to help them sort this out. So they're listening, and they're saying, yeah, you guys are probably better at this than us, but they haven't written a chapter. And that might be because of the DoD shrinking right now, and as they get rid of some of these efforts, it'll free up money, and hopefully, DoD expands and contracts. Next time there's an emergency, they may say, hey, we need to figure this out now. But still looking for the funding.
Next question.
So-
Neil, yeah.
So I've gotten really interested in ideology recently, and I'm wondering if you've come across that's particularly good at representing ideology. It just seems like a very messy issue, as well as modeling something like religion, which is also very complex.
Yeah, so I work for the guys in the Department of Defense that's one of their things they're focused on. I'm the closest thing, like I'm talking to the guys that are the closest to that problem set that you want to talk to. They are the guys that hire psychologists, they hire strategic messaging people, they hire religious experts. There's even a field called, it's up at Yale, the Jackson Institute, interfaith dialogue. All of these things, I work with those guys. That's what they think of. They want to be able to say accurate things about ideology, so that look, these are not psychologists. They're not cognitive scientists. They don't know about affective science. But they're the guys that need to take those products and convert them into actionable information. So, if it's going to get done properly, it's not going to be done here at Fort Bragg or down at Joint Special Operations. It's going to be done by guys like you, working interdisciplinary with other departments, like affective science, like cognitive science, like interfaith dialogue, and those things. So that actually next week I'm going to a conference in DC to talk about who's going to get funded for these types of things. Because ideology is obviously a big thing. And when we talk about ideology, are we talking about, like you said, it's as soon as you start to drill down on it, you see that it can't be just a room full of smart dudes, special ops guys that are like, hey, ideology, that's important, right? And then they make some wire diagram, so holy shit, we're off to the races. No, that's how we don't want to do this. We need real people, in an academic environment, really looking at this stuff. And I'll tell you, we have smart people in the military, but they don't have the expertise to do it. So, are you doing something in particular in ideology?
Well, in part, I'm working on something that could be helpful someday. So I think part of the problem is we're representing people's belief systems, but really their belief systems are kind of uninteresting, because what we're really interested in is what motivates them or what triggers them to perform certain kinds of actions, right? And whether or not they believe that God has some name versus another is kind of uninteresting. It's whether or not that belief is going to motivate them in a particular situation. And so looking at things like the kind of information that's provided by psychological scales that measure dispositions to act, those, I think, are potentially more interesting than just modeling someone's religious views.
Yeah, if you go back to those slides that I had, the foreign fighter, and I had his idea, my point to them was, don't think for a minute that you all are going to figure this out. That was my point to them. Was don't think you're going to get a room full of smart dudes and they're going to figure it out. You have to go talk to cognitive scientists, people who are putting that. I heard a general say last week in Washington, I want the guy or gal that gets up in the morning, that's what they think about. That's what I want to hire. I was like, dang, that's what we're talking about. So Neil, you might be that guy. I don't know.
Well, call me when you get the $10 million.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I already have my cast and crew that I want to hire. So, what I would suggest for the time being, who are you? Are you talking to anyone about this in the government?
I'll say no.
You're gonna say,
Not allowed to say.
Sorry, what's
So-
that?
Okay, there's two senses to that. There's the I'm going to say no, and then there's the open source people that care about this, that like Department of State. And actually, my good friend from Afghanistan, who just graduated from Yale, he did work in this field extensively. He did his master's thesis in this, and he did amazing stuff with social media and ideology, like crazy, amazing stuff. So the only thing I can offer you at this point is to put you in contact with people here. But it sounds like there are already these people that don't exist that are already talking to you. Department of State is told this is their backyard. They're supposed to be focused on this, and actually, Department of State has. I'll say that they are very interested in these things.
Well, I keep reading about military investment in the Sodaring anthropologist.
Wait, you're breaking up. Just
Okay.
let it-
I'll try to speak more clearly. So they're hiring right now social psychologists and anthropologists to go in and interview people who are getting involved in these conflicts, and presumably they're creating lots of data, right? And it seems like if you want to get to know foreign fighters, this is really the way to do it.
I think you're right. That was probably when I briefed that. That look, this is an interdisciplinary problem, and there's going to be a lot of data produced.
Yeah.
And I think your role in this deal, one of your roles could be, you get that room full of experts, cognitive science, psychologists, whatever. You get these people in there. The ontologist is going to be the person that says, look, what you're talking about is a disposition, what you're talking about is a physiochemical process, what you're talking about is an actual physical thing that exists, and tying all that together, I think that's where the craziness starts. Is when people, I actually heard an epidemiologist, a medical doctor, say that Bacillus anthracis was a weapon of mass destruction, and I'm like, that's just dumb on so many levels. And this guy was an epidemiologist. So when they say, that's when the craziness starts, is when they start going outside their area of expertise. Because he claimed to be a data scientist. He was an epidemiologist / data scientist. So, yeah, I think you should probably reach out to other people, and I can, let you know who I think they are. Do you have a demo or anything that you're trying to do?
I have a topical defense in a week,
Oh, really?
so maybe if that goes well, I'll get in touch with you.
What's the title of the topical defense?
It's a moral psychology, ontology, and implications for meta-ethics.
Okay, and is this master's or doctorate?
Doctorate.
Oh, okay. And so you would like to market that to DOD, DOS, and say, hey, I can come work for you and help you sort this out. Is that what you're saying?
Among others, sure.
Okay. Okay. I definitely have some people that you want to talk to. But you might already have people. I don't know.
He has to write the dissertation.
Everyone's banging down my door. I haven't written anything yet, but yeah.
Is that true? People are banging down your door?
No.
So one thing he does need is data
No.
to test out the idea.
What kind of thing?
Well, some of that I can already get, so it'll be survey data for the most part.
Listen, I work with the people that collect all the survey data, so maybe
Or it could
I
be
work with you.
sentiment analysis data too. So if you know anyone who's doing corpus analysis,
Yes, I do. Why don't you send me an email, and name drop. I'll do some name dropping and see if we can get you some data. Are you cleared?
No.
No. Okay. Unclassed data. But send me an email and see if we can, get you what you need. I definitely know some people that that I know the woman who's in charge of all that data. That's her thing. She's in charge of it for the Army. She probably want to talk to me.
Yep.
Her name's Dr. Lynn Copeland. She works with me. She's in charge of civil information management, the whole program. So she might be helpful. Or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Gotta have one more. I see a hand going up.
Yeah. You talked about foreign fighters, and you made the example of Kurds on one side and the ISIS on the other side. And we usually say that, of course, ISIS are the terrorists and Kurds are freedom fighters. And I wonder if there's a formal definition and a distinction between these two things: freedom fighters and guerrilla warfare on the one hand, and terrorism and terrorists on the other.
Yeah, so this will sound weird. I don't use those titles.
Speak up.
I don't use those titles.
Oh, okay.
I put titles in there because that's what other people use, but you're right. I was in Iraq, and the tribe that we were fighting every day became our friend, like overnight. So they went from being insurgents to being freedom fighters overnight. So I think the titles are helpful, again, for human consumption, but maybe title like violent extremist organization is helpful because they're an organization that's violent and extremist. And they might be a bad guy to us, they might be a good guy, but that can change. So that's another sticky category term that we have to be careful with. As a matter of fact, I was just at Johns Hopkins last week, and that very topic came up. Let's not even call them that; just call them a violent extremist organization, because you just leave a lot of those more specific titles out because there's no clear definition.
And what about radical Islam and those kinds of categories?
Yeah. Certainly, we have radical Islamist jihadists. I'm okay with those titles. That's just my opinion. I think those are useful titles. But definitions, there's a lot of stuff. Actually, we had a whole. There's a magazine called Asymmetric Warfare, or was it Special Operations? One of our periodicals. They had a whole. It was an entire series devoted to defining these things.
Thank you.
So I guess your next task, Bill, is to provide BFO conformant definitions to all of the titles that you approve of.
Yeah. That would be tough. I think a lot of those titles would go away or be really seriously revised. But I do think to everyone there, I think if I was going to give any last advice, when I was I went in the service, and when I came out, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and I knew the one thing I wanted to go to law school because I thought, well, that's what you do, and go do law. And my wife said to me, "What do you really like to do?" I said, "I love doing philosophy. I love metaphysics, ontology." She said, "Then just do that. Just follow it, do it." So what I'm saying is, stay with it, and it will work out for you. It has served me very well. Very, very well. As a matter of fact, I got pulled into that thing I'm going to next week. And my analysis on a lot of these things, breaking it down like we've talked about today, you do just basic decomposition of something, and people think you're brilliant for it. It's like, no, it's just a disciplined methodology, and people just forget to do that. And when you're good at it, it's amazing to them. Like, oh, you're brilliant. No, I just know BFO and outside the box. So stick with it, and I think it's going to serve you well. How many philosophy students are philosophy grad students? All of you?
So about half of the people here. One person is a professor at a Brazilian Air Force University institution.
Yeah.
2 people are geographers. One
Okay.
person is are you a philosopher? And I guess that just about covers it. But we all have an interest in ontology.
Yeah.
I guess there's me, I'm not the student. Okay, thank you very much, Bill.
Yeah.